To you Spanish ladies. You love to hear those voices. Alright. Let me switch over here. Would help if I had added that first. Now I was talking for 3 seconds, but at least I got that one sooner than I've gotten it before. Man. Okay. So, listen to that beautiful Spanish ladies. So we'll probably have this on in the background while we read a little bit, so we just get into the spirit of the American Revolution. I got my Stay Centered shirt on. Of course, very important to stay centered, stay in the middle. Right? Stay in the middle as best you can when it comes to life and the best, pursuit of the best. So, with that being said, let me make this. I need to stack these on top of each other. I've got my chats here. Oops. Did I close it? No, I did not. Okay. Got my 3 chats. I don't expect to use them, but got them up anyway. So I am multi-streaming. I'm on 3 different platforms today: Rumble, YouTube, and Twitch. I think I might have gotten it to work correctly. So with that, we'll just go ahead and get on into it. John Paul is a pirate. John Paul Jones is a pirate. That's quite the statement. All right, let me pull up this capture, and here we are. There we are. So where are we starting off with? The Franklin Seal. Benjamin Franklin. I wonder if he drew this himself. Probably not. Illustrated by E. Boyd Smith. Okay, he didn't draw it. But there you go. It is Autobiography. So that means this was written by none other than Benjamin Franklin, the man himself. Franklin Seal. So this is the seal of the Franklin family name. Here he is, I suppose, over in France, giving a little bit of a encouragement to support the cause of the American Revolution and liberty, which is all well and good there. Let's see. Here's a quote from Thomas Jefferson, who I did not put on the collage there, but maybe a little later. He was therefore feasted and invited to all court parties. At these he sometimes met the old Duchess of Bourbon, who, being a chess player of about his force, they very generally played together. Happening once to put her king into prize, the doctor took it. "Ah," says she, "we do not take kings so." "We do in America," said the doctor. Interesting. Interesting. So the Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin with illustrations by E. Boyd Smith. 1916. Past copyright. Moving on. Franklin at the court of Louis the 14th. Or 15th. No, 16th, sorry. He was, therefore, feasted and invited to all the court parties. At these he sometimes met the old Duchess of Bourbon, who, being a chess player of about his force, they very generally played together. Happening once to put her king into prize, the doctor took it. "Ah," says she, "we do not take kings so, we do in America," said the doctor. So it's the same thing we just... It's the same thing. But he was at chess. Okay. So, here we have our table of contents. What are we going to get into? Well, probably going to get through, I'm going to say, probably the arrival in Philadelphia. The early life in Boston to beginning of life as a printer, and the arrival in Philadelphia. Before we get much further. So, with that, let me see here. Oops. Let's go. Yeah, I think we'll get through the first 3 chapters, and then after that, we'll see where we're at. I might have to cut it and go do something else, but all right. Here's that again. Portraits. Okay, so this is telling us what's... Maybe I'll come back if we need to get some more clarification on what exactly it is that we are looking at here. So, let's take a look. I was born in Boston, New England, and owe my first instructions in literature to the free grammar schools established there. I therefore give £100 sterling to my executors to be by them, paid over to the managers or directors of the free schools in my native town of Boston, to be by them, put out to interest, and so continued at interest forever, which interest annually shall be laid out in silver medals and given as honorary rewards annually by the directors of said free schools, belonging to the said town, in such manner as to the discretion of the select men, and said town shall see meet. So engraving there. Look how smug he's looking. He's looking smug as a mug. It's like, I'm Benjamin Franklin. I know it. I'm Ben. You can look. You can look all you want. God, what a guy. All right, introduction. We Americans devour eagerly any piece of writing that purports to tell us the secrets of success in life. Very true. You can tell, of course, by the success of self-help books in the United States. Yet, how often we are disappointed to find nothing but commonplace statements or receipts that we know by heart but never follow. The dude was speaking truth way back then. How many self-help books do you guys have on your shelf? You tell me. And how many have you actually followed through to completion? He's getting right to the heart of it there. Interesting. Most of the life stories of our famous and successful men fail to inspire because they lack the human element that makes the record real and brings the story within our grasp. While we are searching far and near for some Aladdin's lamp to give coveted fortune, there is ready at our hand if we will only reach out and take it, like the charm in Milton's Comus. Unknown and like esteemed, and the dull swain treads on it daily with his clouded shoon. I don't know what I just read, but sounds interesting. The interesting human and vividly told story of one of the wisest and most useful lives in our own history, and perhaps in any history. And Franklin's autobiography is offered not so much as a ready-made formula for success as the companionship... Oh wait, is this... This isn't actually him, is it? Is it? Introduction. So who does the introduction? Is it himself? No, it's probably not himself. Alright, well I take back all I said then. Of the wisest, most useful lives in our history, perhaps in any history. And Franklin's autobiography is offered not so much by a ready-made man-made formula of success, the companionship of real flesh and blood, a man of extraordinary mind and quality, whose daily walk and conversation will help us to meet our own, what is this here? Our own Um, hold on a moment. There we go. Our own difficulties. There it is. Much as does this example of a wise and strong friend. While we are fascinated by the story, we absorb the human experience through which a strong and helpful character is building. The thing that makes Franklin's autobiography different from every other life story of a great and successful man is just this human aspect of the account. Franklin told the story of his life, as he himself says, for the benefit of his posterity. He wanted to help them by the relation of his own rise from obscurity and poverty to eminence and wealth. He is not unmindful of the importance of his public services and their recognition, yet his accounts on these achievements are given only as part of the story, and vanity displayed and incidental, and in keeping with the honesty of the recital. There is nothing of the impossible in the method and practice of Franklin as he sets them forth. The youth who reads the fascinating story is astonished to find that Franklin in his early years struggled with the same everyday passions and difficulties that he himself experiences. He loses the sense of discouragement that comes from a realization of his own shortcomings and inability to attain. There are other reasons why the autobiography should be an intimate friend of American young people. Here, they may establish a close relationship with one of the foremost Americans as well as one of the wisest men of his age. The life of Benjamin Franklin is of importance to every American, primarily because of the part he played in securing the independence of the United States and establishing it as a nation. Franklin shares with Washington the honors of the Revolution and the events leading to the birth of the new nation. While Washington was the animating spirit of the struggle in the colonies, Franklin was its ablest champion abroad. To Franklin's cogent reasoning and keen satire, we owe the clear and forcible presentation of the American case in England and France, while to his personality and diplomacy, as well as to his facile pen, we are indebted for the foreign alliance and the funds, without which Washington's work must have failed. His patience, fortitude, and practical wisdom, coupled with the self-sacrificing devotion to the cause of his country, are hardly less noticeable than the similar qualities displayed by Washington. In fact, Franklin, as a public man, was much like Washington, especially in the entire disinterestedness of his public service. Franklin is also interesting to us because, by his life and teachings, he has done more than any other American to advance the material prosperity of his countrymen. It is said that his widely and faithfully read maxims made Philadelphia and Pennsylvania wealthy, while Poor Richard's pithy savings, translated into many languages, have had a worldwide influence. That's a good one. I would like to read that. Those are just good maxims to continue and know by heart. Franklin is a good type of our American manhood. Although not the wealthiest or most powerful, he is undoubtedly in the versatility of his genius and achievements. The greatest of our self-made men, the simple yet graphic story in the autobiography of his steady rise from humble boyhood in a tallow chandler shop by industry and economy and perseverance and self-improvement to eminence is the most remarkable of all the remarkable histories of our self-made men. It is in itself a wonderful illustration of the results possible to be attained in a land of unequaled opportunity by following Franklin's maxims. Of course, Franklin's fame, however, was not confined to his own country. Although he lived in... Oh, goodness. Hold on a second. Although he lived in... Oh, where did I go? Why did I lose that? Manhood, okay. Although not the wealthiest, most powerful, he is undoubtedly the versatility of his genius and achievements. The greatest of our self-made men, the simple yet graphic story of the autobiography about the steady rise from the humble boyhood in a tallow chandler shop by industry, economy, and perseverance in self-improvement to eminence is the most remarkable of all remarkable histories of our self-made men. It is in itself a wonderful illustration of the results possible to be attained in a land of unequaled opportunity by following Franklin's maxims. Franklin's fame, however, was not confined to his own country. Although he lived in a century notable for the rapid evolution of scientific and political thought and activity, yet no less a keen judge and critic than Lord Jeffrey. The famous editor of Edinburgh Review a century ago said that in one point of view, the name of Franklin must be considered as standing higher than any of the others which illustrated this 18th century. Distinguished as a statesman, he was equally great as a philosopher, thus uniting in himself a rare degree of excellence in both these pursuits, to excel in either of which is deemed the highest praise. Franklin has indeed been aptly called many-sided. He was eminent in science and public service, in diplomacy and in literature. He was the Edison of his day. Turning his scientific discoveries to the benefit of his fellow men, he perceived the identity of lightning and electricity and set up the lightning rod. He invented the Franklin stove, still widely used, and refused to patent it. He possessed a masterly shrewdness in business and practical affairs. Carlyle called him the father of all the Yankees. He founded a fire company, assisted in founding a hospital, and improved the cleaning and lighting of streets. He developed journalism, established the American Philosophical Society, the Public Library in Philadelphia, and the University of Pennsylvania. He organized a postal system for the colonies, which was the basis of the present United States Post Office. Bancroft, the eminent historian, called him the greatest diplomatist of his century. He perfected the Albany Plan of Union for the colonies. He is the only statesman who signed the Declaration of Independence, the Treaty of the Alliance with France, and the Treaty of Peace with England, and the Constitution. As a writer, he has produced in his autobiography and in Poor Richard's Almanac 2 works that have not surpassed by similar writing. He received honorary degrees from Harvard and Yale, and Oxford and St. Andrews, and was made a Fellow of the Royal Society, which awarded him the Copley Gold Medal for improving natural knowledge. He was one of the 8 foreign associates of the French Academy of Science. The careful study of the autobiography is also valuable because of the style in which it is written. If Robert Louis Stevenson is right in believing that his remarkable style was acquired by limitation, then the youth who would gain the power to express his ideas clearly, forcibly, and interestingly cannot do better than to study Franklin's method. Of course, Franklin's fame in the scientific world was due almost as much to his modest, simple, and sincere manner of presenting his discoveries, to the precision and clearness in the style in which he described his experiments, as to the result he was able to announce. Sir Humphrey Davy, the celebrated English chemist, himself an excellent literary critic, as well as a great scientist, said, "A singular felicity guided all of Franklin's researches." And by very small means he established very grand truths. The style and manner of his publication on electricity are almost as worthy of admiration as the doctrine it contains. Franklin's place in literature is hard to determine because he was not a primarily literary man. His aim in the writings as his life work was to be always a means to an end. Yet his success as a scientist, a statesman, and a diplomat, as well as socially, was in no part due to his ability as a writer. His letters charmed all, and made his correspondence eagerly sought. His political arguments were the joy of his party and a dread of his opponents. His scientific discoveries were explained in language at once so simple and so clear that plowboy and exquisite could follow his thought or his experiment to its conclusion. As far as American literature is concerned, Franklin has no contemporaries. Before the autobiography, only one literary work of importance had been produced in the country: Cotton Mather's Magnalia, a church history of New England in a ponderous stiff style. Franklin was the first American author to gain wide permanent reputation in Europe. The autobiography, Poor Richard, Father Abraham's Speech, or The Way of the Wealth, as well as some of the bagatelles, are as widely known abroad as any American writings. Franklin must also be classed as the first American humorist. English literature of the 18th century was characterized by the development of prose. Periodical literature reached its perfection early in the century in the Tatler and the Spectator of Addison and Steele. Pamphleteers flourished throughout the period. The homelier prose of Bunyan and Defoe gradually gave place to the more elegant and artificial language of Samuel Johnson, who set the standard for prose writing from 1745 onward. This century saw the beginnings of the modern novel in Fielding's Tom Jones, Clarissa Harlowe, Trieste. Okay, these are just titles. I'm going to go through this. In the simplicity, the vigor of his style, Franklin more nearly resembles the earlier groups of writers. In his first essays, he was not an inferior imitator of Addison, numerous parables, moral allegories, apologues. The first great English journalist and master of newspaper narrative, the style of both writers is marked homely, vigorous expression, satire, burlesque, repartee. Here, the comparison must end. Defoe and his contemporaries were authors. Their vocation was writing, and their success rests on the imaginative, creative power they displayed. The authorship Franklin laid no claim. He wrote no work of the imagination. He developed only incidentally a style in many respects as remarkable as that of English contemporaries. He wrote the best autobiography in existence, one of the most widely known collections of maxims, and an unsurpassed series of political and social satires. Because he was a man of unusual scope of power and usefulness, who knew how to tell his fellow men the secrets of that power and that usefulness. Well, we can come back to this. I just want to get into the thing now. Alright. Starting, the Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. Chapter 1. Ancestry and Early Youth in Boston. Twyford at the Bishop of St. Asphes, 1771. Dear son, I have ever had pleasure in obtaining any little anecdotes of my ancestors. You may remember the inquiries which I made among the remains of your... Hold on. I need to kind of develop my voice for Benjamin Franklin here. Dear son, I have ever had the pleasure in obtaining any little anecdotes of my ancestors. You may remember the inquiries I made among the remains of my relations when you were with me in England, and the journey I undertook for that purpose, imagining it may be equally agreeable to you to know the circumstances of my life, many of which you are yet unacquainted with, and expecting the enjoyment of a week's uninterrupted leisure in my present country retirement. I sit down to write them for you, to which I have besides some other inducements, having emerged from the poverty and obscurity in which I was born and bred, to a state of affluence and some degree of reputation in the world, and having gone so far through life with a considerable share of felicity, and conducing means I made use of, which, with the blessing of God, so well succeeded my posterity, may like to know, as they may find some of them suitable to their own situations, and therefore fit to be imitated. The felicity, when I reflected on it, has induced me sometimes to say, that were it offered to my choice, I should have no objection to a repetition of the same life from its beginning, only asking the advantages authors have in the second edition to correct some faults of the first. So, I might, besides correcting the faults, change some sinister accidents and events of it, for others more favorable. But though this were denied, I should still accept the offer, since such a repetition is not to be expected. The next thing most like living one's life over again seems to be a recollection of that life, and to make the recollection as durable as possible by putting it down in writing. Hereby, too, I shall indulge the inclination so natural in old men, to be taking of themselves and their own past actions, and I shall indulge it without being tiresome to others, who, through respect to age, might convince themselves obliged to give me a hearing, since this may be read or not as anyone pleases. And lastly, I may as well confess it, since my denial of it will be believed by nobody, perhaps I shall a good deal gratify my own vanity. Indeed, I scarce ever heard of or saw the introductory words, without vanity I may say, etc. But some vain thing immediately followed. Most people dislike vanity in others, whatever share they have of it in themselves, but I give it fair quarter whenever I meet with it, being persuaded that it is often productive of good to the possessor and to others that are within the sphere of its action. And therefore, in many cases, it would not be altogether absurd if a man were to thank God for his vanity among the other comforts of life. Gibbon and Hume, the great British historians who were contemporaries of Franklin, express in their autobiographies the same feeling about the propriety of just self-praise. So basically saying, it's alright, I'm a little vain, I know it, I'm here to talk about myself a little bit, but if I said I was here just to explain myself, and I wasn't vain at all, then you wouldn't believe me anyway. Good on you, Ben. And now I speak of thanking God. I desire with all humility to acknowledge that I owe the mentioned for happiness of my life to his kind providence, which led me to the means I used and gave them success. My belief in this induces me to hope, though I must not presume that the same goodness will still be exercised towards me, in continuing that happiness, or enabling me to bear a fatal reverse, which I may experience as others have done. The complexion of my future fortune being known to him only in whose power it is to bless us to even our own affections. The notes, one of my uncles, who had the same kind of curiosity in collecting several anecdotes, once put into my hands, furnished me with the several particulars relating to our ancestors. From these notes I learned that the family had lived in the same village, Ecton, in Northamptonshire, for 300 years, and now much longer he knew not, perhaps from the time when the name of Franklin, that before was the name of an order of people, as was assumed by them as a surname when others took surnames all over the kingdom. On a freehold of about 30 acres, aided by the smith's business, which had continued in the family till this time, the eldest son being always bred to that business, a custom which he and my father followed as their eldest sons, which, when I searched the registers of Ecton, I found an account of their births, marriages, and burials from the year 1555 only, there being no registers kept in that parish at any time preceding. By that register I perceived that I was the youngest son of the youngest son for 5 generations back. My grandfather Thomas, who was born in 1598, lived in Ecton till he grew too old to follow business longer, when he went to live with his son John at a dyer in Banbury in Oxfordshire, with whom my father served an apprenticeship. There my grandfather died, and lies buried. We saw his gravestone in 1758. His eldest son Thomas lived in the house at Ecton, and left it with the land to his only child, a daughter, who, with her husband, one Fisher of Wellingborough, sold it to Mr. Isted, now lord of the manor there. My grandfather had 4 sons that grew up, viz. Thomas, John, Benjamin, and Josiah. I will give you what account I can of them at this distance from my papers, and if they are not lost in my absence, you will find them among many more particulars. Thomas was bred as smith under his father, but being ingenious and encouraged in learning, as well my brothers were, by an Esquire Palmer, then the principal gentleman in that parish, he qualified himself for the business of scrivener. Become a considerable man in the country, was a chief mover of all public spirited undertakings for the county or town of Northampton, and his own village, of which many instances were related of him, and much taken notice and patronized by then Lord Halifax. He died in 1702, January 6, old style. Interesting. January 6, 1702. Just 4 years to a day before I was born. The account we received of his life and character was from some old people at Ecton. I remember struck you as something extraordinary from its similarity to what you knew of mine. Had he died on the same day, you said, one might have supposed a transmigration. John was bred a dyer, I believe of woolens. Benjamin was bred a silk dyer, serving an apprenticeship at London. He was an ingenious man. I remember him well, for when I was a boy he came over to my father in Boston, and lived in the house with us some years. He lived to a great age. His grandson Samuel Franklin now lives in Boston. He left behind him 2 quarto volumes of his own poetry, consisting of little occasional pieces addressed to his friends and relations, of which the following sent to me is a specimen. He had formed a shorthand of his own, which he taught me, but never practicing it. I have now forgot it. I was named after this uncle, there being a particular affection between him and my father. He was very pious, a great attender of sermons of the best preachers, which he took down in his shorthand, and had with him many volumes of them. He was also a politician, too much perhaps for his own station. There fell lately into my hands in London a collection he had made of all the principal pamphlets relating to public affairs from 1641 to 1717. Many of the volumes are wanting as appears by the numbering, but there still remain 8 volumes in folio, and 24 in quarto, and in octavo. A dealer in old books met with them, and knowing me by my sometimes buying off them, he brought them to me. It seems my uncle must have left them here when he went to America. which was about 50 years since. There are many of his notes in the margins. This obscure family of ours was early in the Reformation and continued Protestants the reign of Queen Mary, when they were sometimes in the danger of trouble on account of their zeal against popery. They had got an English Bible, and to conceal and secure it, it was fastened open with tapes under and within the cover of the joint stool. When my great-great-grandfather read it to his family, he turned up the joint stool upon his knees, turning over the leaves, then under the tapes. One of the children stood under the door and give notice if he saw an apparator. Well, maybe that means apparition. I'm going to guess. I'm going to look that up. An official formerly sent to carry out the orders of a magistrate, judge, or court. Okay. So, let me get this one. There we are. Move this up. And then, hold on a moment. So, yes, an official formally sent the orders of magistrate, judge, or court. Oh, there we go. Who was an officer of the spiritual court? In the case that the stool was turned down again upon its feet, when the Bible remained concealed under it as before, this anecdote I had from my Uncle Benjamin, the family continued all the Church of England till about the end of Charles II's reign, when some of the ministers that had been outed for nonconformity holding conventicles in Northamptonshire, Benjamin and Josiah adhered to them, and so continued all their lives. The rest of the family remained in the Episcopal Church. The birthplace of Franklin, Milk Street, Boston. Josiah, my father, married young, and carried his wife with 3 children into New England, about 1682. The conventicles, having been forbidden by law and frequently disturbed, induced some considerable men of acquaintance to move to that country, and he was prevailed with to accompany them thither, where they expected to enjoy their mode of religion with freedom. By the same wife he had 4 children, more born there, and by a second wife 10 more, in all 17, of which I remember 13 sitting at one time at this table, who all grew up to be men and women, and married. I was the youngest son, and the youngest child, but 2, and was born in Boston, New England. My mother, the second wife, was Abiah Folger, daughter of Peter Folger, one of the first settlers of New England, of whom honorable mention is made by Cotton Mather. Cotton Mather, I mean, just the music. There we go. Cotton Mather, and his church history of that country entitled Magnalia Christi Americana, as godly learned Englishman. If I remember the words rightly, I have heard that he wrote sundry small occasional pieces, but only one of them was printed, which I saw now many years since. It was written in 1675 in the homespun verse of that time and people, and addressed to those then concerned in the government there. It was in favor of liberty of conscience in behalf of the Baptists, Quakers, and other sectaries that had been under persecution, ascribing the Indian wars and other distresses that had befallen the country to that persecution as so many judgments of God to punish so heinous an offense, and exhorting a repeal of those uncharitable laws. The whole appeared to me as written with a good deal of decent plainness and manly freedom. The 6 concluding lines I remember, though I have forgotten the first 2 of the stanza, but purport of them was, his censures proceeded from good will, and therefore he would be known to the author. Because to libeller, says he, I hate it with my heart. From Sherburne town, now where I now dwell, my name I do put here, without offence, your real friend, it is Peter Folgia. My elder brothers were all put to princesses in different trades. I was put to the grammar school at 8 years of age, my father intending to devote me as the tithe of his sons to the service of the church. My early readings readiness in learning to read, which must have been very early, as I do not remember when I could not read, and his opinions to all of his friends, that I should certainly make a good scholar, encouraged him in the purpose of his. My uncle Benjamin too approved of it, and proposed to give me all his short-handed volume sermons. Hold on a moment. Encouraged him in the purpose of his. Yes, okay. Very early. I do not remember when I could not read, and the opinions of all his friends that I should make a good scholar, encouraged the purpose of this. My uncle Benjamin too approved of it, and proposed to give me all his short-hand volumes of sermons, I suppose as a stock to set up with, if I would learn his character. I continued, however, at the grammar school not quite 1 year. So he's telling us the background of his entire life and his family over there in England, and where he grew up and how he came to be. This is all very, very good. I continued, however, at the grammar school not quite 1 year, though in that time I had risen gradually from the middle of the class of that year to be the head of it, and farther was removed into the next class above it, in order to go with that into the third at the end of the year. But my father, in the meantime, from a view of the expensive college education, which, having so large a family, he could not well afford, and the mean living many so educated were afterwards able to obtain, reasons that he gave to his friends in my hearing, altered his first intention, took me from the grammar school, and sent me to a school for writing and arithmetic, kept by a then famous man, Mr. George Brownwell, very successful in his profession generally, and that by mild encouraging methods under him I acquired fair writing pretty soon. But I failed in the arithmetic and made no progress in it. At 10 years old, I was taken home to assist my father in his business, which was that of a tallow chandler and soap boiler. I guess soap. So that's how you spelled soap back then. A business he was not bred to, but had assumed on his arrival in New England, on finding his dying trade would not maintain his family, being in little request. Accordingly, I was employed in cutting wick for the candles, filling the dipping mold in the molds for cast candles, attending the shop, going of errands, etc. I disliked the trade and had a strong inclination for the sea, but my father declared against it. However, living near the water, I was much in and about it, learnt early to swim as well, and to manage boats, and when in a boat or canoe with other boys, I was commonly allowed to govern, especially in any case of difficulty, and upon other occasions, I was generally a leader among the boys, and sometimes led them into scrapes, of which I will mention one instance, as it shows an early projecting public spirit, though not then justly conducted. So it's basically like, yeah, I got into a fight once, but it wasn't really a fight that was a just fight. So I'll tell you anyway. There was a salt marsh that bounded the part of the mill pond, and on the edge of which, at a high water, we used to stand and fish for minnows. By much trampling, we had made it a mere quagmire. My proposal was to build a wharf there fit for us to stand upon, and I showed my comrades a large heap of stones, which were intended for a new house near the marsh, and which would work very well to suit our purpose. Accordingly, in the evening, when the workmen were gone, I assembled a number of my playfellows, and working with them diligently, like so many emmets, sometimes 2 or 3 to a stone, we brought them all away and built our little wharf. The next morning, the workmen were surprised at the missing of the stones, which were found in our wharf. Inquiry was made after the removers. We were discovered and complained of. Several of us were corrected by our fathers, and though I pleaded the usefulness of our work, mine convinced me that nothing was useful which was not honest. There you go. So we learned a lesson there. I think you may like to know something of this person and character. He had an excellent constitution of body, was of middle stature, but well set and very strong. He was ingenious, could draw prettily, was skilled a little in music, and had a clear, pleasing voice, so that when he played psalm tunes on his violin and sung withal, as he sometimes did in the evening after the business of the day was over, it was extremely agreeable to hear. He had a mechanical genius too, and on occasion was very handy in the use of other tradesmen's tools. But his great excellence lay in a sound understanding and solid judgment in prudential matters, both in private and public affairs. In the latter, indeed, he was never employed. The numerous family he had to educate, and the straitness of his circumstances, keeping him close to his trade. But I remember well his being frequently visited by the leading people. Who consulted with him for his opinion in affairs of the town or the church he belonged to, and showed a good deal of respect for his judgment and advice. He was also much consulted there for his opinion in affairs of the town or of the church he belonged to, and showed a great deal of respect for his judgment and advice. He was also consulted about their affairs, and any difficulty occurred, and frequently chosen by an arbitrator between contending parties. At his table, he liked to have, as often as he could, some sensible friend or neighbor to converse with, and always took care to start some ingenious or useful topic for discourse, which might tend to improve the minds of his children. By this means he turned our attention to what was good, just, and prudent in the conduct of life, and little or no notice was ever taken of what was related to the victuals on the table, whether it was well or ill dressed, in or out of season, of good or bad flavor, preferable or inferior to this or that other thing of the kind, so that I was brought up in such perfect inattention to those matters as to be quite indifferent what kind of food was set before me, and so unobservant of it, that to this day I am asked, and I can scarce tell a few hours after dinner what I dined upon. This has been a convenience to me in traveling, where my companions have been somewhat very unhappy for want of a suitable gratification of their more delicate, because better instructed tastes and appetites. My mother had likewise an excellent constitution. She suckled all her 10 children. I never knew either my father or mother to have any sickness but that of which they died, he at 89 and she at 85 years of age. Pretty old there for that era. They lie buried together at Boston, where I some years since placed a marble over their grave with this inscription: Josiah Franklin and Ibia his wife lie here interred. They lived long lovingly together in wedlock 55 years, without an estate or any gainful employment, constant labor and industry. With God's blessing, they maintained large family comfortably, and brought up 13 children and 7 grandchildren reputably. From this instance, reader, be encouraged to diligence in thy calling, and distrust not Providence. He was a pious and prudent man, she a discreet and virtuous woman. Their youngest son, in filial regard to their memory, places this stone. Born 1655, died 1744, 1667, 1752. By my rambling digressions, I perceive myself to be grown old. I used to write more than methodically, but one does not dress for private company as for a public ball. 'Tis perhaps only negligence. To return, I continued thus employed in my father's business for 2 years, that is, till I was 12 years old, and my brother John, who was bred to that business, having left my father married and set up himself at the Rhode Island, there was all appearance that I was destined to supply his place, and become a tallow chandler. But my dislike to the trade continuing, my father was under apprehensions that if he did not find one form more agreeable, I should break away and get to sea, as his son Josiah had done, to his great vexation. He therefore sometimes took me to walk with him, and see joiners, bricklayers, turners, braziers, at their work, that he might observe my inclination, and endeavor to fix it on some trade or other on land. It has ever since been a pleasure to me to see good workmen handle their tools, and it has been useful to me, having learnt so much by it, as to be able to do little jobs. There myself in my house, when a workman could not readily be got, and to construct little machines for my experiments, while the intention of making the experiment was fresh and warm in my mind, my father at last fixed upon the cutler's trade, and my uncle Benjamin's son Samuel, who was bred to that business in London, being about the time established in Boston, I was sent to be with him some time on liking. But his expectations of a fee with me displeasing my father, I was taken home again. A small village not far from Winchester in Hampshire. These are the addendums. Okay, so we're on to Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Beginning life as a printer. From a child, I was fond of reading, and all the little money that came into my hands was ever laid out in books. Pleased with the Pilgrim's Progress, my first collection was of John Bunyan's works in separate little volumes. I afterwards sold them to enable me to buy R. Burton's historical collections. They were small Chapman's books, and cheap, 40 or 50 in all. My father's little library consisted chiefly of books in polemic divinity, most of which I read, and have since often regretted that, at a time when I had such a thirst for knowledge, more proper books had not fallen in my way, since it was now resolved I should not be a clergyman. Plutarch's Lives there was in which I read abundantly, and I still think that time spent to great advantage. There was also a book of Defoe's called an Essay on Projects, and another of Dr. Mather's called Essays to Do Good, which perhaps gave me a turn of thinking that had an influence on some of the principal future events of my life. This bookish inclination at length determined my father to make me a printer, though he already had one son of that profession. In 1717, my brother James returned from England with a press and letters to set up his business in Boston. I liked it much better than that of my father, but still had a hankering for the sea. To prevent the apprehended effect of such an inclination, my father was impatient to have me bound to my brother. I stood out some time, but at last was persuaded and signed the indentures when I was yet but 12 years old. So he wanted to be... Father wanted to be bound to the printers. He stood out for some time, but was last persuaded. Okay, so he still was wanting to go to the sea, but then he was persuaded by the father and then signed the indentured servitude papers. I was to serve as an apprentice till I was 21 years of age. Only I was to be allowed journeyman's wages during the last year. In a little time, I made great proficiency in the business and became a useful hand to my brother. I now had access to better books. An acquaintance with the apprentices of the booksellers enabled me sometimes to borrow a small one, which I was careful to return soon and clean. Often I sat up in my room reading. The greatest part of the night, when the book was borrowed in the evening and to be returned early in the morning, lest it should be missed or wanted. And after some time, an ingenious tradesman, Mr. Matthew Adams, who had a pretty collection of books, who frequently frequented our printing house, took notice of me, invited me to his library, and very kindly lent me such books as I chose to read. I now took a fancy to poetry, and made some little pieces of my brother, thinking it might turn to account, encouraged me, and put me on composing occasional ballads. One was The Lighthouse tragedy, contained an account of the drowning of Captain Worthlake with his two daughters. With his two daughters. The other was a sailor song on the taking of Teach, or Blackbeard the pirate. They were wretched stuff, in the Grub Street ballad style, and when they were printed he sent me about town to sell them. The first sold wonderfully, the event being recent. Having made a great noise, this flattered my vanity. But my father discouraged me by ridiculing my performances, and telling me verse makers were generally beggars, so I escaped being a poet, most probably a very bad one. But as prose writing has been of great use to me in the course of my life, and was principal means to my advancement, I shall tell you how in such a situation I acquired what little ability I have in that way. Hold on a moment. Okay, this is fine. There was another bookish lad in town, John Collins, by the name, with whom I was intimately acquainted. We sometimes disputed, and very fond we were of argument, and very desirous of confuting one another, which had a disputatious turn, by the way, is apt to become a very bad habit, making people often extremely disagreeable in company, by the contradiction that it is necessary to bring into practice, and thence, besides sorring and spoiling the conversation, is productive of disgusts, and perhaps enmities where you may have occasion for friendship. I had caught it by reading my father's books of dispute about religion. Persons of good sense, I have since observed, seldom fall into it, except lawyers, university men, and men of all sorts that have been bred at Edinburgh. A question was once, somehow or other, started between Collins and me, of the propriety of educating the female sex in learning, and their abilities for study. He was of the opinion that it was improper, and that they were naturally unequal to it. I took the contrary side, perhaps a little for dispute's sake. He was naturally more eloquent and had a ready plenty of words, and sometimes, as I thought, bore me down more by his fluency than by the strength of his reasons. As we parted without settling the point, and were not to see one another again for some time, I sat down to put my arguments in writing, which I copied fair and sent to him. He answered, and I replied. 3 or 4 letters of a side had passed, when my father happened to find my papers and read them. Without entering into the discussion, he took occasion to talk to me about the manner of my writing, observed that, though I had the advantage of my antagonist in a correct spelling and pointing, which I owed to the printing house, I fell far short in elegance of expression, in method, and in perspicuity, of which he convinced me by several instances. I saw the justice of his remarks, and thence grew more attentive to the manner in writing, and determined to endeavor at improvement. About this time, I met with the odd volume of The Spectator. It was third. I had never before seen any of them. I bought it, read it over, and was much delighted with it. I thought the writing excellent, and wished, if possible, to imitate it. With his view, I took some of the papers, and making short hints of the sentiment in each sentence, laid them by the few days, and then, without looking at the book, tried to complete the papers again, by expressing each hinted sentiment at length, and as fully as it had been expressed before in any suitable words that should come to hand. Then I compared my Spectator with the original, discovered some of my faults, and corrected them. But I found I wanted a stock of words, or a readiness in recording and using them, which I thought I should have acquired before that time, if I had gone on making verses, since the continual occasion for words of the same import, but of different length to suit the measure, or of different sound for the rhyme, would have laid me under a constant necessity of searching for a variety. Where did I go? Variety, and also have tended to fix that variety in my mind, and make me master of it. Therefore I took some of the tales and turned them into a verse, and after a time, when I had pretty well forgotten the prose, turned them back again. I also sometimes jumbled my collections of hints into confusion, and after some weeks endeavored to reduce them into the best order, before I began the form and full sentences and complete the paper. Let's see here. Hold on a moment. I'll be right back to get something. Okay, I'm back. Had to grab an apple. Healthy snack. You know. Alright, let's see. I don't remember. Okay. I'm just to start back here. Tried to complete the papers again by expressing each hinted sentiment at length, and as fully as it had been expressed before. Any suitable words that should come to hand, then I compared my spectator with the original, discovered some of my faults, and corrected them. But I found I wanted a stock of words or a readiness in recollecting and using them, which I thought I should have acquired before that time. Since the continual occasion for words of the same import but of different length, to suit the measure a different sound of rhyme, which had laid me under a constant necessity of searching for variety, and also have tended to fix that variety in my mind, and make me a master of it. Therefore, I took some of the tales and turned them into verse, and after a time when I had pretty well forgotten the prose, turned them back again. I also sometimes jumbled my collection of hints into confusion, and after some weeks endeavored to reduce them into the best order, before I began to form the full sentences and complete the paper. This was to teach me method in the arrangement of thoughts. By comparing my work afterwards with the original, I discovered many faults and amended them, but I sometimes had the pleasure of fancying that, in certain particulars of small import, I had been lucky enough to improve the method of the language, and this encouraged me to think I might possibly in time come to be a tolerable English writer, of which I was extremely ambitious. My time for these exercises and for reading was at night, after work, or before it began in the morning, or on Sundays, when I contrived to be in the printing house alone, evading as much as I could the common attendance on public worship, which my father used to exact of me when I was under his care, and which I still thought a duty, that thought I could not, as it seemed to me, afford time to practice it. Okay. When about 16 years of age... Hold on a moment. I'm going to change the music. Let's see if I can find... Total... I don't think that's... No. Not really. I'm gonna get that claimed if I play that. Hold on. I know what I'm gonna do. I know what I'm going to do. This will work. When about 16 years of age, I happened to meet with a book written by one Tryon, recommending a vegetable diet. I determined to go into it. My brother, being yet unmarried, did not keep house, but boarded himself and his apprentices in another family. By refusing to eat flesh, occasioned an inconveniency, and I was frequently chid for my singularity. I made myself acquainted with Tyron's manner of preparing some of his dishes, such as boiling potatoes or rice, making hasty pudding, and a few others, and then proposed to my brother that if he would give me, weekly, half the money he paid for my board, I would board myself. He instantly agreed to it. I presently found that I could save half what he paid me. This was an additional fund for buying books, but I had another advantage in it. My brother and the rest going from a printing house to their meals, I remained there alone. Let me turn that down just a little bit. And dispatching presently my light repast, which often was no more than a biscuit, or a slice of bread, a handful of raisins, or a tart from the pastry's cook's, and a glass of water, had the rest of time till their return for study, in which I made the greater progress. From that greater clearness of head and quicker apprehension which usually attend temperance in eating and drinking. And now it was that, being on some occasion made ashamed of my ignorance in figures, which I had twice failed in learning when at school, I took Crocker's book of arithmetic and went through the whole by myself. Man, this is really loud. With great ease. I also read Sellers and Shermy's books of navigation and became acquainted with the little geometry they contain, but never proceeded far in that science. And I read about this time Locke on Human Understanding and the Art of Thinking by Messrs. de Port Royal. While I was intent on improving my language, I met with an English grammar, I think it was Greenwood's, at the end of which there were 2 little sketches of the arts of rhetoric and logic. The latter finishing with a specimen of dispute in the Socratic method, and soon after I procured Xenophon's Memorable Things of Socrates, wherein there are many instances of the same method. I was charmed with it, adopted it, and dropped my abrupt contradiction and positive argumentation, and put on the humble inquirer and doubter, and being them, from reading Shaftesbury and Collins, become a real doubter in many points of our religious doctrine. I found this method safest for myself, and very embarrassing to those against whom I used it. Therefore, I took delight in it, practiced it continuously, and grew very artful and expert in drawing people, even of superior knowledge, into concessions, and consequences of which they did not foresee, entangling them in difficulties out of which they could not extricate themselves, and so obtaining victories that neither myself nor my cause always deserved. I continued this method for some years, but gradually left it, retaining only the habit of expressing myself in terms of modest diffidence, never using, when I advanced anything that may possibly be disputed, the words certainly, undoubtedly, or any others that give the air of positiveness to an opinion. So, when I advanced anything that may possibly be disputed, the words certainly, undoubtedly, and any others that give air to positive opinion. Never used those words. So you never, of course, you never say, when you're trying to argue a point, you never try and say, I am 100% certain on this particular issue. I have no doubts that this is the way. This is how it is supposed to be done. You don't say that, because you always want to leave room to give yourself an out. In law, in jurisprudence, in life, you never want to be 100% on something. It's just, sorry. Everyone has doubts. When you say you don't, then you're being a little false. When you're trying to have these things that could be disputed. And if there's evidence to the contrary, well, now you've made yourself look like a fool, as I'm sure Benjamin Franklin would say. But rather say, I convince or apprehend a thing to be so and so. It appears to me I should think it so and so for such and such reasons, or I imagine it to be so, or it is so. I conceive. Okay, so he's telling us how to actually speak. Instead of using these 100% types of words, use the I think, I should think, I imagine, I believe so. I'm not, if I'm not mistaken. It's kind of how I speak. But I get told a lot of times that I'm speaking in too passive of a manner when I speak that way. On papers that I've written, they said, use more of an aggressive tone. As if I have all the answers to the universe. But, anyway. This habit, I believe, has been of great advantage to me when I have had occasion to inculcate my opinions and persuade men into measures that I have been from time to time engaged in promoting. As the chief ends of conversation are to inform, or to be informed, to please, or to persuade, I wish well-meaning sensible men would not lessen their power of doing good by a positive, assuming manner that seldom fails to discuss, tends to create opposition, and to defeat every one of the purposes for which speech was given to us, to wit, giving or receiving information or pleasure. For if you would inform a positive and dogmatical manner in advancing your sentiments, may provoke contradiction and prevent a candid attention, if you wish information and improvement from the knowledge of others, and yet at the same time express yourself as firmly fixed in your present opinions, modest, sensible men, who do not love disputation, will probably leave you undisturbed in the possession of your error, and by such a manner you can seldom hope to recommend yourself in pleasing your hearers, or to persuade those whose concurrence you desire. Pope says judiciously, men should be taught as if you taught them not, and things unknown proposed as things forgot. Nice rhyme. Father recommending to us to speak those sure with seeming diffidence, and he might have coupled with this line that which he has coupled with another, I think, less properly. For want of modesty is want of sense. If you ask why less properly, I must repeat the lines. Immodest words admit of no defense, for want of modesty is want of sense. Now, is not want of sense where a man is so unfortunate as to want some apology for his want of modesty, and would not the lines and more justly thus? Immodest words admit but this defense, that want of modesty is want of sense. This, however, I should submit to better judgments. My brother had, in 1720 or 1721, begun to print a newspaper. It was the second that appeared in America, and was called the New England Courant. The only one before it was the Boston News Letter. I remember his being dissuaded by some of his friends from the undertaking, as not likely to succeed, one newspaper being, in their judgment, enough for America, at this time, 1771. There are not less than 25, he went on. However, with the undertaking, and after having worked in composing the types and printing off the sheets, I was employed to carry the papers through the streets to the customers. So here is an edition of the New England Courant. He had some ingenious men among his friends who amused themselves by writing little pieces for this paper, which gained its credit and made it more in demand, and these gentlemen often visited us. Also, if you recognize the music, thumbs up to you, because one of my favorite games here. Hearing their conversations and their accounts of the approbation their papers were received with, I was excited to try my hand among them, but being still a boy and suspecting that my brother would object to printing anything of mine in his paper, if he knew it to be mine, I contrived to disguise my hand in writing an anonymous paper. I put it in at night under the door of the printing house. It was found in the morning, and communicated it to his writing friends when they called it unusual. As usual, They read it, commented on it in my hearing, and I had the exquisite pleasure of finding it met with their approbation, and that, in their different guesses at the author, none were named but men of some character among us for learning and ingenuity. I suppose now that I was rather lucky in my judges, and that perhaps they were not really so very good ones as I then esteemed them. Encouraged, however, by this, I wrote and conveyed in the same way to the press several more papers, which were equally approved, and I kept my secret till my small fund of sense for such performances was pretty well exhausted, and then I discovered it when I began to be considered a little more by my brother's acquaintance, and in a manner that did not quite please him, as he thought probably with reason, that it tended to make me too vain, and perhaps this might be one occasion of the differences that we began to have about this time. Though a brother, he considered himself as my master, and me as his apprentice, and accordingly expected the same services from me as he would from another, while I thought he demeaned me too much in some he required of me, who from a brother expected more indulgence. Our disputes were often brought before our father, and I fancy I was either generally in the right or else a better pleader, because the judgment was generally in my favor. But my brother was passionate and had often beaten me, which I took extremely amiss, and thinking my apprenticeship very tedious, I was continually wishing for some opportunity of shortening it, which at length offered in a manner unexpected. I was employed to carry the papers through the streets to the customers. So this is him as a boy, handing those papers out to the people of Boston. Hold on a moment. Of course, let's see here. I suppose he would not discover his author. I too was wakened up and examined. Oh wait, one of the pieces in our newspaper on some political point, which I have now forgotten, gave offense to the assembly. He was taken up, censured, and imprisoned for a month by the speaker's warrant. I suppose because he would not discover his author. I too was taken up and examined before the council, but though I did not give them any satisfaction, they contented themselves with admonishing me, and dismissed me, considering me, perhaps, as an apprentice who was bound to keep his master's secrets. During my brother's confinement, which I resented a good deal, notwithstanding our private differences, I had the management of the paper, and I made bold to give our rulers some rubs in it, which my brother took very kindly, while others began to consider me in an unfavorable light, as a young genius that had a turn for libeling and satire. My brother's discharge was accompanied with an order of the House, a very odd one, that James Franklin should no longer print the paper called the New England Courant. There was a consultation held in our printing house among his friends what we should do in this case. Some proposed to evade the order by changing the name of the paper, but my brother, seeing inconveniences in that, it was finally concluded on as a better way to let it be printed for the future under the name of Benjamin Franklin, and to avoid the censure of the assembly that might fall on him, as still printing it by his apprentice, and contrivance was that my old indenture should be returned to me with a full discharge on the back of it, to be shown on occasion. But to secure to him the benefit of my service, I was to sign new indentures for the remainder of the term, which were to be kept private. A very flimsy scheme it was, however. It was immediately executed, and the paper went on accordingly under my name for several months. At length, a fresh difference rising between my brother and me, I took upon me to assert my freedom, presuming that he would not venture to produce the new indenturedness. It was not fair in me to take this advantage, and this I therefore reckon was one of the first errata of my life. But the unfairness of it weighed little with me, and when under the impressions of resentment for the blows his passions too often urged him to bestow upon me, though he was otherwise not an ill-natured man, perhaps I was too saucy and provoking. When he found I would leave him, he took care to prevent my getting employment in any other printing house of the town, by going round and speaking to every master, who accordingly refused to give me work. I then thought of going to New York as the nearest place where there was a printer. So is he saying this man, his brother, would besmirch his name, not allowing him to have work? I believe that's what he's saying. I then thought of going to New York as the nearest place where there was a printer, and I was rather inclined to leave Boston when I reflected that I had already made myself a little obnoxious to the governing party. And from the arbitrary proceedings of the assembly in my brother's case, it was likely I might, if I stayed, soon bring myself into scrapes. And farther, that my indiscreet disputations with religion began to make me pointed at with horror at with horror by good people as an infidel or atheist. I determined on that point, but my father now siding with my brother, I was sensible that if I attempted to go openly, means would be used to prevent me. My friend Collins therefore undertook to manage a little for me. He agreed with the captain of New York sloop for my passage, under the notion of my being a young acquaintance of his. So I sold some of my books to raise a little money, was taken on board privately, and as we had a fair wind in 3 days, I found myself in New York, near 300 miles from home. A boy of but 17, without the least recommendation to, or knowledge of, any person in the place, and with very little money in my pocket. So he went to New York. All right. Or Philadelphia. Wait, hold on a second. Captain New York sloop for my passage. Yes, so he went from Boston and went to New York. Okay. So, arrival in Philadelphia. Chapter 3. My inclinations for the sea were by this time worn out, or I might now have gratified them, but having a trade and supposing myself a pretty good workman, I offered my service to the printer in the place, old Mr. William Bradford, who had been the first painter in Pennsylvania, but removed from thence upon the quarrel of George Keith. He could give me no employment, having little to do and help enough already. But, says he, my son at Philadelphia has lately lost his principal hand, Aquia Rose, by death if you go thither. I believe he may employ you. Philadelphia was 100 miles further. I set out, however, in a boat for Amboy, leaving my chest and things to follow me round by sea. In crossing the bay, we met with a squall that tore our rotten sails to pieces, prevented our getting into the Kill, which drove us upon Long Island. In our way, a drunken Dutchman, who was a passenger too, fell overboard. When he was sinking, I reached through the water to his shock pate, and drew him up so that we got him in again. His ducking sobered with him a little. He went to sleep, taking first out of his pocket a book, which he despaired I would dry for him. It proved to be my old favorite author, Bunyan Pilgrim's Progress, in Dutch, finely printed on good paper with copper cuts, a dress better than I have ever seen it wear in its own language. I have since found that it has been translated into most of the languages of Europe, and suppose it has been generally read than any other book. Except perhaps the Bible. Honest John was the first that I knew of who mixed narration and dialogue. A method of writing very engaging to the reader, who in the most interesting parts find himself, as it were, brought into the company and present at the discourse. Defoe in his Crusoe, his Moll Flanders, Religious Courtship, Family Instructor, and other pieces, imitated it, with success. And Richardson has done the same in his Pamela. I'm not sure what that is at all. Samuel Richardson, the father of English novel. Oh, okay. Got you. Alright. So, when we drew near the island, we found it was at the place where there could be no landing, there being a great surf on the stony beach, so we dropped anchor and swung round towards the shore. Some people came down to the water edge and hallooed to us, as we did to them, but the wind was so high and the surf so loud that we could not hear so as to understand each other. There were canoes on the shore, and we made signs and hallooed that they should fetch us, but they either did not understand us or thought it impracticable. So they went away, and night coming on, we had no remedy but to wait till the wind should abate. And in the meantime, the boatman and I concluded to sleep, if we could, and so crowded into the scuttle with the Dutchman, who was still wet, and the spray beating over the head of our boat leaked through to us, so that we were soon almost as wet as he. In this manner we lay at night, with very little rest, but, the wind abating the next day, we made a shift to reach Amboy before night, having been 30 hours on the water, without victuals, or any drink, but a bottle of filthy rum, and the water we sailed on being salt. In another universe, Benjamin Franklin was a pirate. He absolutely was like lost at sea at some point, and he just became a pirate. He would have been probably a very well written pirate too. That'd have been fun. That'd be a fun universe to live in. Benjamin Franklin, the dread pirate Benjamin Franklin. That'd be great. The way he talks is just awesome. In the evening, I found myself very feverish and went into bed. But having read somewhere that cold water drank plentifully was good for a fever, I followed the prescription, sweat plentifully most of the night. My fever left me, and in the morning, crossing the ferry, I proceeded on my journey on foot, having 50 miles to Burlington, where I was told I should find boats that would carry me the rest of the way to Philadelphia. It rained very hard all the day. I was thoroughly soaked and by noon a good deal tired. So I stopped at a poor inn, where I stayed all night, beginning now to wish that I had never left home. I cut so miserable a figure, too, that I found by the question asked me, I was suspected to be some runaway servant, and in danger of being taken up on that suspicion. However, I proceeded the next day, and got in the evening to an inn, within 8 or 10 with me, while I took some refreshment. Oh, wait, no. Nope. I just cut some miserable figure to that question me. I was suspected of a runaway servant and in danger of being taken up on that suspicion. However, I proceeded the next day and got in the evening in an inn within 8 or 10 miles of Burlington, kept by one Dr. Brown. He entered into conversation with me while I took some refreshment, and finding I had read a little, become very sociable and friendly. Our acquaintance continued as long as he'd lived. He had been, I imagine, an itinerant doctor, for there was no town in England or country in Europe of which he could not give a very particular account. He had some letters which was ingenious, but much of an unbeliever, and wickedly undertook, some years later, to travesty the Bible of doggerel verse, as Cotton had done Virgil. By this means he has set many of the facts in a very ridiculous light, and might have hurt weak minds if his work had been published, but it never was. Excuse me. At his house I lay that night, and the next morning I reached Burlington. Had the notification and had the regular boats were gone a little before my coming, and no other expected to go before Tuesday, this was being Saturday. Wherefore I returned to an old woman in the town, and whom I had brought gingerbread to eat on the water, and asked her advice. She invited me to the lodge at her house till a passage by water should offer, and being tired with my foot traveling, I accepted the invitation. She, understanding I was a printer, would have had me stay at the town and follow my business, being ignorant of the stock necessary to begin with. She was very hospitable, gave me a dinner of ox cheek, with good food, with great good will, accepting only of a pot of ale in return. I thought myself fixed till Tuesday came. Tuesday should come. However, walking in the evening by the side of the river, a boat came by, which I found was going towards Philadelphia, with several people in her. They took me in, and, as there was no wind, we rowed all the way. And about midnight, not having yet seen the city, some of the company were confident we must have passed it, and would row no further. The others knew not where we were, so we put towards the shore. Got into a creek, landed near an old fence, with the rails of which we made a fire. The night being cold, in October, we remained till daylight. Then one of the company knew the place of Cooper's Creek, a little above Philadelphia, which we saw as soon as we got out of the creek, arrived there at about 8 or 9 o'clock on the Sunday morning, and landed at Market Street Wharf. I have been the more particular in this description of my journey, and shall be so of my first entry into that city, that you may in your mind compare such unlikely beginnings with the figure I have since made there. I was in my working dress, my best clothes being to come round by sea. I was dirty from my journey, my pockets were stuffed out with shirts and stockings, and I knew no soul, nowhere to look for lodging. I was fatigued with traveling, rowing, and want of rest. I was very hungry, and my whole stock of cash consisted of a Dutch dollar and about a shilling in copper. The latter I gave the people of the boat for my passage, who at first refused it, on account of my rowing, but I insisted on their taking it, a man being sometimes more generous when he has but a little money than when he has plenty, perhaps through fear of being thought to have but little. Then I walked up the street, gazing about, till near the market house I met a boy with bread. I had made many a meal on bread, and inquiring where he got it, I went immediately to the baker's he directed me to, in Second Street, and asked for biscuit, intending such as we had in Boston. But they, it seems, were not made in Philadelphia. See, this is interesting. Like, he was a poor guy, and he chanced it all on taking a trip down to Philadelphia to find a new life and to get better. Do you think he had any, like, he had no guarantees that he was actually going to make it in Philadelphia, yet he took the chance anyway, took all of his stuff, everything that he could, left from the place there he was from, left his entire roots, and went and created an entirely new life in a place he had never been. Which, as scary as it is now to make a new life in a place you've never been, imagine how scary it was then, when you had no idea. You had no idea what was waiting for you, either across the ocean or down south, because all you had were tales and perhaps a book or writings. You really didn't have images, maybe an illustration or two. But besides that, all you had was the promise that hopefully the next place that you go is going to be better than where you left. And I think it's just amazing that, you know, people took such risks to create a better life for themselves. Amazing. Okay. Then I walked up the street, gazing about till the near market house I met with a boy with bread. Asked for the biscuit, attending such as we had in Boston. But they, it seems, were not made in Philadelphia. So, no biscuits in Boston, so the comforts of home he does not have. Then I asked for 3-penny loaf, and was told they had none such. So, not considering or knowing the difference of money and the greater cheapness nor the names of his bread, I bade him give me 3-penny worth of any sort. He gave me accordingly 3 great puffy rolls. I was surprised at the quantity, but took it, and having no room in my pockets, walked off with a roll under each arm, and eating the other. Thus I went up Market Street, as far as 4th Street, passing by the door of Mr. Reed, my future wife's father, when she, standing at the door, saw me, and thought I made, as I certainly did, a most awkward, ridiculous appearance. So this is when he would meet his would-be wife. He met his would-be father-in-law also, right here, as he's carrying these 3 giant puffy rolls that he'd just gotten off the boat trying to get something to eat with. And he's going down the street and he's carrying 3 giant rolls. Imagine how ridiculous this man must have looked. He must have looked absolutely insane. It's like, is this man have a stomach that goes to the center of the earth? You'll never marry my daughter. Amazing. Just to see a sight like that back in Philadelphia or anywhere in the colonies. So, I was surprised the quantity took it. Mr. Reed, my future wife's father, when she, standing at the door, saw me, I thought I made a most ridiculous appearance. Then I turned and went down Chestnut Street and part of Walnut Street, eating my roll all the way, and coming round, found myself again on Market Street Wharf, near the boat I came in, which I went for the draught of river water. And being filled with one of my rolls, gave the other 2 to a woman and her child that came down the river in a boat with us, and were waiting to go farther. See? So he took the rolls, he didn't eat them all. What he did was, he ate one for himself, and then he gave the other 2 to his people that he was traveling with there. That must be Miss Reed, his would-be wife later on. Thus refreshed, I walked up the street again, which by this time had many clean-dressed people in it, who were all walking the same way. I joined them, and thereby was led into the great meeting house of the Quakers near the market. I sat down among them, and after looking round a while and hearing nothing, said, being very drowsy through labor and want of rest the preceding night, I fell fast asleep, and continued so till the meeting broke up, when one was kind enough to rouse me. This was therefore the first house I was in, or slept in Philadelphia. Walking down again toward the river, looking in the faces of people, I met a young Quaker man, whose countenance I liked, and accosting him, requested he would tell me where a stranger could get lodging. We were then near the sign of 3 Manors. Here, says he, is one place that entertains strangers, but it is not reputable house. If thee wilt walk with me, I'll show thee a better. A lot of words there. He brought me to the Crooked Billet in Water Street. Here I got a dinner, and while I was eating it, several sly questions were asked me, as it seemed to be suspected from my youth and appearance that I might be some runaway. Indeed, you would look quite different in those times. After dinner, my sleepiness returned, and being shown to a bed, I lay down without undressing, and slept till 6 in the evening, and was called to supper. Wow, he remembers the time? I guess maybe it's approximate, but slept till 6 in the evening, was called to supper, went to bed again very early, and slept soundly till next morning. Then I made myself as tidy as I could, and went to Andrew Bradford, the printer's. I found in the shop the old man, his father, whom I had seen at New York, and who, traveling on horseback, had got to Philadelphia before me. He introduced me to his son, who received me civilly, gave me a breakfast, but told me he did not, at present, want a hand, being lately supplied with one. But there was another printer in town, lately set up, one Kimmier, who, perhaps, might employ me. If not, I should be welcome to lodge at his house, and he would give me little work to do now, and then till fuller business should offer. The old gentleman said he would go with me to the new printer, and when we found him, neighbor, says Bradford, I have brought to see you a young man of your business. Perhaps you may want such a one. He asked me a few questions, put a composing stick in my hand to see how I worked, and then said he would employ me soon. Though he had just then nothing for me to do, and taking old Bradford, whom he had never seen before, to be one of the townspeople that had a good will for him, entered into a conversation on his present undertaking and prospects, while Bradford, not discovering that he was the other printer's father, on Kimmier, saying he expected soon to get the greatest part of the business into his own hands, drew him on by artful questions, and starting little doubts to explain all his views, what interest he relied on, and in what manner he intended to proceed. I, who stood by and heard all, saw immediately that one of them was a crafty old sophister, the other a mere novice. Bradford left me with Kimmier, who was greatly surprised when I told him who the old man was. Kimmier's printing house, I found, consisted of an old shattered press, and one small worn-out font of English, which he was then using himself, composing an elegy on Aquia Rose, before mentioned, in an ingenious young man of excellent character, much respected in the town, clerk of the assembly, and a pretty poet. Kimmier made verses too, but very indifferently. He could not be said to write them, for his manner was to compose them in the types directly out of his head, so there being no copy. But one pair of cases and the elegy likely to require all the letter, no one could help him. I endeavored to put his press, which he had not yet used, and of which he understood nothing, into order fit to be worked with, and promising to come and print off his elegy as soon as he should have got it ready, I returned to Bradford's, who gave me a little job to do for the present, and there I lodged and dieted. A few days after, Kimmier sent for me to print off the elegy, and now he had got another pair of cases, and a pamphlet to reprint, on which he sent me to work. These two printers I found poorly qualified for their business. Bradford had not been bred to it, and was very illiterate, and Kimmier, though something of a scholar, was a mere compositor, knowing nothing of presswork. He had been one of the French prophets, and could act their enthusiastic agitations. At this time he did not profess any particular religion, but something of all occasion, was very ignorant of the world, and had, as I afterward found, a good deal of the knave in his composition. He did not like my lodging at Bradford's while I worked with him. He had a house indeed, but without furniture, so he could not lodge me. Hold on a moment. I'm going to finish this. Actually, here. I'll make this fun. Yes, stop one. Nope, reset. Hold on a second. Oh no, no, cancel. Where is it? No. Oh wait, no, is it not window capture? Maybe it's... Oh, well, this isn't working exactly as quickly as I thought it was going to do. Here. Can we change? Nope. 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 Huh. Doesn't seem to work. Alright, well, never mind then. Never mind. I'll just eat this very quickly. There we go. Could act their enthusiastic agitations. At this time, he did not profess any particular religion, but something of all on occasion, was very ignorant of the world, and had, as I afterward found, a good deal of the knave in his composition. He did not like my lodging at Bradford's while I worked with him. He had a house indeed, but without furniture, so he could not lodge me, and he got me a lodging at Mr. Reed's before mentioned, who was the owner of his house, and my chest and clothes was being come by this time. I made rather a more respectable appearance in the eyes of Miss Reed than I had done when she first happened to see me eating my roll in the street. Well done. I began to now have some acquaintance among the young people, and that's how I met your mother. I was eating rolls in the street. I began now to have some acquaintance among the young people of the town that were lovers of reading, with whom I spent my evenings very pleasantly, and gaining money by my industry and frugality, I lived very agreeably, forgetting Boston as much as I could, and not desiring that any there should know where I resided, except my friend Collins, who was in my secret, and kept it when I wrote to him. At length an incident happened that sent me back again much sooner than I had intended. I had a brother-in-law, Robert Holmes, master of a sloop that traded between Boston and Delaware. He being at Newcastle, 40 miles below Philadelphia, heard there of me, and wrote me a letter mentioning the concern of my friends in Boston at my abrupt departure, assuring me of their goodwill to me, and that everything would be accommodated to my mind if I would return, to which he exhorted me very earnestly. I wrote an answer to his letter, thanked him for his advice, but stated my reasons for quitting Boston fully, and in such light as to convince him I was not so wrong as he had apprehended. Alright, so we've made it to the end of chapter 3, which I said we would get to. Is anyone interested in continuing? Otherwise, I think I'm going to be ending it here for the moment. But if you would like to follow along and continue to read with me about Benjamin Franklin and the rest of his autobiography, as well as the music I have here, and watch my stream, you can follow me, of course, on this course, Tall Glass 10, which is me on Twitter, or you can follow me on YouTube at The Human Advocate or on Rumble at The Human Advocate as well, and I will be there as well. And my next plan is I hope to stream again. Let's see, today's Wednesday, so I will try for Saturday morning or Friday morning, I believe. So I'll probably won't be streaming tomorrow, but Friday or Saturday morning. If you follow me on Twitter, I will make sure to announce that. I didn't announce this stream on Twitter, of course, today, but I will next time. And because I was making this title card here, which I'm very, very proud of, and here I'll take this down so we can see that. There we go. Yes, this is my title card I've made for the stream. Of course, we have, yes, if I didn't mention before, Benjamin Franklin here on the right. We have Alexander de Tocqueville in the middle. We have General George Washington, or President George Washington here, as he would have been back in his day. I think at the later ages, 60. And then this is the bottom one here. This is him as if he was a modern president, which I always get a kick out of just seeing that. And then here is Benjamin Franklin, of course, being on the front of Cosmopolitan magazine. Of course, if he was around today, he would absolutely be one of the people put in the centerpiece on the cover page of Cosmopolitan or any other gossip magazine that you would find. So, with that, I thank you for tuning in. I thank you for watching. If you would like, yes, follow me on Tall Glass 10. Follow me at The Human Advocate on YouTube, or follow me on Rumble. And I will be there next time. I appreciate y'all. Thank you for tuning in. Semper Sursum and Excelsior. Have a great day, and we hope to see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
home your life to face the evil night. But in the darkest night, when our children are asleep, I think about the families of our enemy. Do they feel the same? Believe in their own truth? They must love the children as fiercely as we do. We all share one thing, our hearts were given from above, and the only thing worth fighting for in this world is love. Oh,